Hi, this is Mrs. Rutherford. Today I'm going to be doing some of the review questions. I'm going to do part of that bottom at 16 through 30, I believe. I'm going to be doing number 18 first. Okay, some of you guys are getting confused with the inverse. Arc is the same thing as writing cosine negative 1, and then my negative square root of 3 over 2. Now remember, when I'm doing the inverse or the arc, all that means is my answer is going to be an angle. Okay, that means it's going to be on the inside part of my unit circle. An angle, 30 degrees, 90 degrees, 45 degrees, but instead of degrees, our answers are in radians. Now, if I'm dealing with cosine and I'm dealing with the inverse of cosine, I'm only going to deal with my first and second quadrant only. On your quiz, some of you guys gave answers like negative pi over 6 and negative pi over 4, but I'm not even dealing with my negative quadrant. I'm only dealing with my first quadrant and my second quadrant. So for the inverse of cosine, cosine is going to be my x value. So I need to look at all my x values right here. Here's some x values. Here are my other x values. Those are the only x values I had to choose from for my unit circle. Do any of them match? Yes, this one matches. So this one falls under this angle. So the answer is going to be 5 pi over 6. It is that simple and that easy, as long as you have your unit circle. You will not be given a unit circle on your test. We have not given you any unit circle, and we will never give you another unit circle after the quiz you had. The quiz you had about making your own unit circle. Make sure you are prepared. On your quiz, a lot of you got the answers wrong because you switched up your coordinates and you put them wrong all the way around, and that caused your answers to be incorrect. You need to know how to make a unit circle. Okay, next question. We're going to go back. I'm going to do number 17. Again, this can be written as tangent, inverse of tangent for negative square root of 3. Now, when I am finding the inverse or the arc, I'm finding the angle. Some of you still give answers as one of these coordinate points. Some of you said this equals a half, or this equals square root of 2 over 2. That does not make any sense. It's going to equal an angle. So it's going to equal, another way to write it is, when does regular tangent at what angle equals the square root of negative 3? The negative square root of 3. So what I have to do is, well, how do I find tangent? That's going to be sine over cosine. So take a step back. Let me look at all my sine and cosine. Tangent, I'm going to be dealing with the first quadrant and the negative first. Okay? I'm going to deal with the first and the negative first. That means these are no longer here. This is now going to be negative pi over 6 and negative pi over 4 and negative pi over 3. Same here. This is not 3 pi over 2. This is negative pi over 2. Okay? So now that I have this written out, tangent, sine over cosine gives me negative square root of 3. Well, this negative is going to tell me that they're going to be different signs. One has to be a positive, one has to be a negative. Well, that means my answer is going to be in here. Now, if I do my y divided by my x, 0 divided by 1, I'm going to get 0. Is that what I want? No. So that's not going to be right. Okay, so let me try this one. Negative 1 divided by 0. Well, that's going to give me undefined. Is that what I want? No. Okay, well, let's try this one. Negative square root of 2 over 2 divided by square root of 2 over 2. Well, you're going to multiply flip the second fraction. It's going to give me -1. Is that what I want? No. So we found out this is not the answer, this is not the answer, and those do not work. So that means 0 degrees is out, negative pi over 4 is out, and negative pi over 2 is out. So now I only have two other choices, a 50-50 shot. Yes, you could guess and get a 50% chance of getting it wrong, or you can just do the math. So here I'm going to take my y first. Y is on top. -1/2 divided by the square root of 3 over 2. So what that means is I'm going to take the second fraction and flip it. I'm going to multiply. Well, my 2's are going to cancel out, and I'm going to get -1 over the square root of 3. Can I leave a radical on the bottom? No. Multiply by the radicals over the radical, and I get the square root of 3 over 3. Is that the same thing? No. So that is not my answer. So I only have one answer left. But I'm going to check it to make sure I did not make a mistake. So my y goes first. So I have negative square root of 3 over 2 divided by 1/2. I'm going to flip the second fraction and multiply. 2's cancel out, and I get negative square root of 3 over 1. Is that what I wanted? Yes. So this is correct. This is not my answer. My angle that makes it true is my answer. So it's negative pi over 3. This is what I'm talking about messing up your unit circle means that you're going to get the answers wrong. If you messed up and put -1/2 here and put square root of 3 over 2 here, well then your sine divided by your cosine would have gotten you this answer. But my answer is not negative pi over 6. It's because you messed up your coordinate points. So please be careful when you make your unit circle. Okay, next one, cosecant. Well, before I do anything, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. That means cosecant is going to equal 1 over sine. All this means is that I'm going to flip this. So I'm going to try to find sine, the inverse of sine, for -3 over 2 times the square root of 3. But that's nowhere on my unit circle, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it is. I cannot have a radical on the bottom. So I multiply both by a radical of 3, square root of 3. So now I will have -3 times the square root of 3 over 2 times 3. Well, my 3's cancel out, so I'm left with negative square root of 3 over 2. So what I'm looking for is, when does sine equal the negative square root of 3 over 2? Well, sine means I'm going to deal with my first and my negative first quadrant. And since this is negative, I'm going to be looking down here. And I'm looking for sine, so I'm looking for my y values. Here is my answer. That means this is not my answer because it's going to be negative pi over 3. So my answer is negative pi over 3. Again, this is what happens. If you are messing up on your unit circle, you will not be able to find these locations. It is that important to make sure you know your unit circle. Print out those old practice tests, those old practice quizzes, and practice, practice, practice. Okay, next one. Okay, this is when it gets a little bit more intense. We have to do the inside of the parentheses first. So I'm going to ignore this, and I'm going to start with what is inside the parentheses first. So I need to find the inverse of cosine for a half. So when does cosine equal a half? Inverse. I'm looking for an angle. I'm looking for my radians. Since it's cosine, I'm going to be looking in my first and my second quadrant. Okay, this is not a negative second or a negative first. It is just my second. So that means my numbers stay the same. But since my cosine is positive, it's going to be in this row. I'm looking at all 3 of these x's, or all 5 of these x's. Negative a half is located right here. So that means that this is now going to equal my angle, which is pi over 3. So this is now equal to pi over 3. So now I'm finding sine of pi over 3. I can look in any 4 quadrants for sine. We have talked about this. Sine, that's going back old school, going back to 4 or 5, 6 weeks ago. Sine of pi over 3 means I'm going to come over here, I'm going to find pi over 3. Then I'm going to find my sine value, which is my y. So my answer is going to be square root of 3 over 2. Okay, next one. This is a little different. This is going backwards. This time my inverse is on the outside. So I still do what's inside my parentheses first, but it does not say inverse. I'm not looking for an angle. I'm looking for that measurement, that coordinate point. So I can look in any of the 4 quadrants. The inverse of cosine only lets me look in the first and second. But regular cosine lets me look in all 4. So 7 pi over 6 is located right here. Cosine is going to be my x value. So my answer to my first part is going to be right here. So now this is going to say negative square root of 3 over 2. So now I'm going to look for the arc cosine, which we said I could also write cosine negative 1 of negative square root of 3 over 2. This negative 1 right here, that negative 1, this one, is telling me my answer is going to be an angle. I'm not flipping anything. I'm not changing any numbers. I'm not changing my x and my y or my sine and my cosine. I'm not changing any of that. What this negative 1 means is I'm looking for the angle. So if I'm looking for the angle and I'm doing the inverse, I will only be looking in 1 and 2 for cosine. Well, these are all positive x's, and this is a negative. So I'm going to be looking in my second quadrant. Right here is when my answer is negative square root of 3 over 2. Remember, this is the second quadrant. This is not going to be negative pi over 6. It stays with what the angle says. So this is going to be 5 pi over 6.